If you are attempting to do something in another culture, whether your plan is to do that through business or to do that through ministry, there are really only two options to be successful. Because when you go cross-cultural, the other culture is going to have certain customs and certain foods and certain fears and certain anxieties that you simply don't understand. And so if you want to be successful in a cross-cultural setting, there are really only two options. Option number one, you find someone from that culture and you invest in them and let them lead the program. One of the things I love about many of the missions we support here at the church, like we're putting together a mission team to go with TCM. If you don't know what TCM does, they do exactly that. They find an Afghani man who wants to minister to Afghanis, and they train him to do ministry because he already speaks the language and eats the foods and knows the cultures and knows all of the hidden potholes that you and I would walk in and say something that we thought was perfectly appropriate, and we defend everybody in the room because we just don't know. The other option is this. If you are an outsider and you want to start a business somewhere else or you want to do ministry somewhere else, the other option is you can move there and become one of them. You can learn their customs and learn their food and learn their language and learn their fears and learn. You can become like them. And once you understand them, then you may speak to them. And I bring that up because the Christmas story at the core, the hope, the beauty of the Christmas story is this: that we do not serve a God who stood somewhere on the outside and pointed a finger at us and went, "You guys got to do better. Why are you messing everything up?" We do not serve a God who stood at a distance and went, "Well, someday when you get your act together, everything will be okay." But as we just sang, the heart of the Christmas story is this: God is not out there somewhere. God is not distant. He's not angry with us. He's not opposed to us. He's not pointing a finger at us. God is with us. That is the beauty of the power of the Christmas story. Dorothy Sears puts it this way. She says that whatever game God is playing with his creation, he has kept his own rules, and he has played fair. For he exacts nothing from man that he has not exacted from himself. For he himself has gone through the whole of human experience, from the trivial irritations of family life. You're about to remember that. It's Christmas. You're going to spend a lot of time with your family. You're going to know all about the trivial irritations of family life, about the cramping restrictions of hard work, about a lack of money, about the horrors of pain and humiliation, about defeat and despair and death. When God was a man, he played the man. He was born in poverty, died in disgrace, and he thought it was all worth his time. The beauty of the Christmas story is that song that we sang, that God has come to be with us. That he's not out there somewhere hoping we get it together. That he's not at a distance pointing a finger, but that he is with us, among us, and he understands. He became one of us, that he might speak truth and offer hope to us. We get this idea not only from the promises we see throughout Scripture of God's presence, but primarily from the story in Matthew chapter 1. We're going to read from Matthew chapter 1 if you want to turn there in your Bible. We're going to pick up in verse 20 in just a moment. I'll give you a little bit of the backstory while you're turning. If you remember, Joseph and Mary are engaged. They are pledged to be married. And the typical Jewish engagement lasted for a year. And the purpose of that engagement was for the young lady to prove that she had been sexually pure. Because if she had been with a man and was perhaps pregnant, in the course of that year it would show up, right? Evidence of said pregnancy would become apparent. So you were pledged to one another, but you were not intimate with one another so that they could prove the purity of the bride to be. And in this case, during that year period, Mary did what every man feared. She began to look like she was pregnant. As best we can tell from piecing the stories together, she left to visit Elizabeth, and when she came back 3 months later, she was far enough along that Joseph went, "That's not my baby. What happened here?" And so Joseph had a plan. He could have publicly disgraced her, he could have shamed her, but because he is a merciful and righteous man, he plans to just leave her quietly. He's not going to take the fault for this, he's not going to share in her shame, but he's not going to make it any worse either. And then one night, Joseph has a dream, and an angel gives him a different message. This is Matthew chapter 1, verse 20. But after he had considered these things, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared to him in a dream, saying, "Joseph, son of David, don't be afraid to take Mary as your wife, because what has been conceived in her is by the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you are to name him Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins." Now all this took place to fulfill what was spoken by the Lord through the prophet. "See, the virgin will become pregnant and give birth to a son, and they will name him Immanuel," which is translated, "God is with us." And when Joseph got up from sleeping, he did as the Lord's angel had commanded him. He married her, but did not know her intimately until she gave birth to a son, and he named him Jesus. As there is in all of these Christmas passages, there are literally dozens of ways we could go this morning. We could talk about Joseph's character. We could talk about the appearance of the angel. We could talk about the name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. But I want to drill in just on that second title, the name Immanuel, the name that the angel gives to Joseph. And it's really more of a title than a name. I don't imagine when Jesus got in trouble that Mary said, "Jesus, Immanuel, Christ, you come." It's not actually his name, okay? And in case you're ever wondering if Jesus got in trouble because he was perfect, how many of you have ever yelled at your kids when they didn't do anything wrong? Yeah, so he got yelled at. Wasn't his fault, but he got yelled at. We've all been there, right? It's more of a title than a name. It's not a name that anyone ever called him Immanuel. But the title that is given him here is God with us. And in that title, we find two incredibly profound truths. Number one, Jesus is God. You want to know what child this is? You want to know what child is in the manger? The child is God. And the Bible is abundantly clear on that. We read about it in John chapter 1, right? In the beginning was the Word. We know from John 1 the Word is Jesus. In the beginning was Jesus. And Jesus was with God. And Jesus was God. And he was with God in the beginning. We read about it in Colossians chapter 2. He is the image of the invisible God. We read about it again in Philippians chapter 2, that we should be like Jesus, who in his very nature was God, but did not consider that something to hold on to or to use for his own advantage. Over and over and over again, we see this truth taught throughout the New Testament. What child is this? This is God. This is the all-powerful one. This is the all-knowing one. This is the one who is full of love and mercy and righteousness and holiness. This is the creator of the universe lying in a stable. I always wonder, can you imagine raising him? Can you imagine being Joseph? And first you're afraid that, well, my fiance, she must have cheated on me and she's going to have a baby that's not mine. That's really bad. And I'm not so sure the fact that you've been tasked with raising God is going to alleviate any fear or anxiety. That might raise the blood pressure a few more notches. As we have been throughout this series, we want to just take a look at what it might have been like to be one of those people. So here's a look at what Joseph might have been thinking as he watched God, his child, God, grow up.
Yeah, I reckon I've carved at least a dozen of these. Made my first one for my baby boy. Well, it's gonna be an angel. At least the way I remember it. It was a long time ago. See, my boy, well, before he got born, I really didn't know who he was gonna look like. It worried me. Well, see, his mama, she found out she was pregnant, and I didn't want to embarrass her. Baby wasn't mine. I just thought I was going to let her go without making a fuss, you know. But then one night I had this dream, and there was an angel in it. And that angel, he told me I shouldn't be scared to marry that woman because it was God's baby that Mary was having. You know, around here, we got a custom. When a baby gets born, the daddy, he puts that baby across his knees, and that's his way of telling everybody that that baby is his. Well, it took a while for my heart to kind of get used to the idea that that baby was just on loan to me, that he was special. But, well, I made room for him. And when he got born, I did what any daddy would do. I put that boy on my knee. gave him a name. I called him mine. He grew up to a fine boy. Now, all these years later, well, you probably heard about him. He's grown into a fine man. You know, every time I carve one of these, I remember what that angel told me. That Mary's boy, my boy, we're supposed to call him God with us. God with us. Yeah. I reckon that's all I've ever really needed to know. So you asked me who my boy looks like, I'll tell you. He looks like God.
I love that sentiment. You ever want to know what God looks like? You ever want to know how God deals with the brokenhearted? You ever want to know what God feels about those who are sick? You ever want to see what death does to God's heart? Pick up your Bible and read the gospel story. For Jesus looks like his Father. One of my favorite passages that speaks about the character of Jesus is found in Hebrews Chapter One. Writing about the Son and all that who Jesus is, this is what he says. He says, in these last days, he, God, has spoken to us by his Son, whom he has appointed the heir of all things, and through whom he made the universe. He is the radiance of his glory, the exact expression of his nature, and he sustains all things by his powerful word. And after making purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. Who is Jesus? He is the one who has purified us. He is the one who sustains all things. And perhaps most importantly for us this morning, he is the exact expression of the nature of God, the exact representation of who God is. Do you want to know what God looks like? Look at Jesus, because he is the exact expression, all of the love, all of the glory, all of the holiness. Did any of you grow up with a curse of looking like your parents? Where everywhere you went, people were like, you look just like your mom. It's kind of weird when you're your son, but that's okay. Or you look just like your dad. I grew up with that. I found some pictures. Candace has been putting together some photo albums. That's my dad and I at about the same age on the right and the left. And when you see it, we look a little bit like each other, don't we? Same face shape, same nose, same weird mouth open, half smile. My whole life, I've been told how much I look like and act like my dad. And it's true. The good stuff and the bad stuff. Okay? The stuff that you're really proud of and the stuff you're like, I wish I didn't pick that up from him. I got a little bit of both. But you'll notice from looking at the pictures that I am not an exact representation of my father. For example, if you look at his right arm, I'm a little handier than he is. Oh, don't groan at that. If you knew my father, that's a joke he would have told, so it's all right. I have a lot of my mom in me. I have a lot of other people who poured into me. So I look like my father and I act like my father, but I am not the exact representation of his being. I am not the exact expression of his nature. And what the scriptures tell us is that's exactly who Jesus was. What child is this? This is God himself, the fullness of him. And so everything that we believe about God, that he is eternal, that he's omnipotent, that he knows all things, that he is wise, that he is sinless, that he is holy, that he's righteous, that he's merciful, that he's full of grace. All of those things we believe and teach about God, they are true of this child, for he is the fullness of God. But in that name is two things. Not just God, but God with us. This is what it looks like when God comes to be with his people. And there are authors who said it better than me, so I'm just going to read to you a couple of their quotes. This one is from Charles Wesley. You might know it through a song. He writes, "Veiled in flesh the Godhead see. Hail the incarnate deity. Pleased with men as man to dwell. Jesus our Immanuel. God veiled or hidden or wrapped up in flesh. The incarnate deity," he says. C.S. Lewis puts it this way. He says, the Christian story is precisely the story of one grand miracle. The Christian assertion being that what is beyond all space and time, what is uncreated and eternal, came into nature, into human nature, descended into his own universe, and then rose again that he might bring that nature up with him. It is precisely one grand miracle. Or Max Lucado in his book, God Came Near, writes this: the omnipotent in one instant made himself breakable. He who had been spirit became pierceable. He who was larger than the universe became an embryo. He who sustains the world with a word chose to be dependent upon the nourishment of a young girl. God as a fetus, holiness sleeping in a womb, the creator of life being created. It's a crazy thing to even try to wrap your brain around. That the one who was eternal and all-knowing and all-powerful and had never been bound by space or time before suddenly became an infant. Have you seen an infant? They are helpless and frail and weak, and they cry and poop, and that's all they do. And God did that. The God who once spoke the universe into being became one who could not speak. The God who held the world in the palm of his hand suddenly became one who had to hold on for dear life just to learn how to walk. The Creator became the created. The Bible's clear on this too. John 1 doesn't just speak about Jesus in the beginning being with God and he was God. It also says, and then the Word was made flesh and made his dwelling among us. He came to be with us. Philippians 2 doesn't just say that he didn't consider equality with God something to cling to or hold on to. It then says that he humbled himself and was found in human likeness. He became like us. And the crazy thing when you read it in the original text, the thing that says he had the same stuff of God, it's the same thing when it says human likeness. He was made of human stuff. He exchanged God's stuff for human stuff. And why? Because he loves you. Because he's crazy about you. Because he didn't want you to have to go through things alone. Because he didn't want you to have to think that you had to deal with all of the problems of this world by yourself. He didn't want you to think that it was all dependent upon you. He wanted to be with you, to rescue you, to provide you hope. He wanted to show you a better way. And so he came to be with you. And in many ways, it's a fulfillment of the promise of all of the Old Testament. When you read the Old Testament, you'd be amazed how many times that promise shows up. Remember when Moses is getting ready to go see Pharaoh and he goes, I can't, I'm not very good at talking, I'm the wrong person, I can't do this, God. And God makes him a promise, which is, I will be with you. And when Joshua is getting ready to take over and he's going to lead the people into the promised land, and there's a river to cross and there's a big army on the other side, and God says, be bold and courageous. Why? For I will be with you wherever you go. When David's writing the 23rd Psalm and he talks about walking through the valley of the shadow of death, living there, and he says, but I don't fear any evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. One of my favorites is in Ezekiel Chapter One. It's this crazy, weird, psychedelic dream that if you told me you had this dream, I'd recommend you see a counselor, okay? Like it's way out there, wheels and eyes, and it's crazy. But as you read through it and you understand what's happening, Ezekiel 1 is written just as the Israelites are going to exile. Their temple's been destroyed. Their city has been destroyed. And Ezekiel is the prophet to these people in exile. And the entire vision is meant to prove one point. Just because you're not in Jerusalem anymore doesn't mean God has forgotten you. In fact, the vision is God on his throne with the people in exile. The promise is this: no matter where you are, I am with you, says God to his people. And it is fulfilled in Jesus. And the most tangible expression of God. God himself in the flesh with his people. I brought a prop this morning. It's just a little guy. I thought I'd share with you. Anybody have one of these when you were a kid? I had to get a big one because I'm big, so it's got to be, proportionate size-wise. Did any of your kids have a favorite teddy bear when they were little that went with them everywhere? Some of you are like, I still have one of those. What are you talking about? Quit taking, she's taking pictures of me with a giant teddy bear. There's already video footage of it, okay? We don't need a picture. It might have been a teddy bear. Maybe it was a favorite pillow. Maybe it was a blanket. But you remember your kids, or maybe you, and it went with them everywhere. And it became literally their security blanket, right? That if it was dark and stormy outside, they could just curl up and it would make everything okay because it was there. Or when they had to go spend the night at a babysitter's house and you weren't going to be there, they were going to grandma's house for the first time and there were tears and they were afraid. Don't worry, I brought your blanket. Don't worry, I brought your little teddy bear to cuddle up. You remember that experience? Maybe for you, maybe for your kids. And the crazy thing is, the teddy bear doesn't do anything. I mean, the ones now, they like talk, and if you push the right button, they'll cook dinner for you or whatever. But when I was a kid, my teddy bear didn't do anything. It just laid there. It didn't talk to me. It didn't give me a hug. It didn't offer any words of encouragement. It was just there. And that was enough, wasn't it? Its presence made everything else okay. It being there was enough. And what I want you to know as we wrap up our Christmas series this week, we are all fully aware of the brokenness of our world. I mean, just in the past 2 weeks, I wrote down the list of all the conversations I've had in the last 14 days. I've sat with people who are getting ready to celebrate their first Christmas without a loved one and who aren't sure they're going to be able to do it. That their spouse is gone, that their parents are gone, that their kid is gone. And I've tried to offer comfort to some of those folks. I've sat with people who aren't sure that their loved one's going to make it to Christmas this year. That they're watching their mom or their grandma or their spouse take their last breath and they don't know if they're going to be here by the end of the week. I've sat with a family that the couple doesn't know if their marriage is going to make it to the end of the year. They're not sure they want to make it to the end of the year. I've sat with kids who are so mad at their parents, they're not sure their parents are going to let them live there much longer. I've talked with some people battling addiction and abuse and trying to recover from that. I've talked with people who've been through nasty breakups and feel just like no one loves them and they've been rejected by the person they thought was going to be with them forever. I've sat with people and a whole host of things. And I wish what I could tell them is, tomorrow everything's going to be better. Tomorrow it's all going to be fixed. But I can't promise that. Because our world is broken. And if you just pause for a moment and think through what you personally have been through the last year, with your family, with your job, with your health, with the loss of loved ones, you could make a list just like mine, couldn't you? I don't have to tell you how bad life is. I don't have to tell you how messed up our world is. But I can make you two promises. Promise number one. One day, God's going to make it all better. And I don't know when. You and I may be dead before it happens. But one day, God's going to make it all better. There's going to be a brand new heaven and a brand new earth, and there will be no more tears, and there'll be no more pain, there'll be no more sorrow. One day, it'll be fixed. And promise number two, until that day comes, we don't have to face it alone. For God has come to be with us. You see, the beauty of the Christmas story is not that Jesus was with us. The beauty of the Christmas story is that Jesus is God with us today and tomorrow and forever. So the book of Matthew is bookended in this beautiful way. And Matthew Chapter One is the story of Jesus coming down from heaven and the promise that Jesus will be God with us. And then in Matthew 28, at the very end of the book, we see Jesus going back into heaven. But you know what the promise is? The promise is not, wasn't it nice that God was with you for 30 years? The promise is that God will continue to be with you. This is how the book of Matthew ends. He says, "And remember, I am with you always, even until the end of the age." And so I cannot promise you that it will be better by the end of the week. I cannot promise you that it will be better by the end of the year. I cannot promise you that 2022 will be any better than the last 2 years. We all thought that about 2021. We stood here a year ago like, man, I'm so glad 2020 is over. I don't know about you, but I think this year's been harder than last year. I can't promise you anything other than this. One day God will make it better. And until then, he promises to be with you. And he understands. He knows what it is to lose a loved one. He grieved at the grave of a loved one. He knows what it is to feel all alone. His friends abandoned him. He knows what it is to suffer and face death. He knows what it is to be hungry. He knows what it is to be so tired and overwhelmed that he just wants a moment of silence. He knows and understands, and he says, I am with you in whatever it is that you're facing. That's the promise of Christmas. Far better than a teddy bear. The presence of God is with you in whatever you might be facing this morning. We're going to end with a song that normally we sing at the beginning of the Christmas season. It's one of the few true Advent songs that we actually sing. It's called O Come, Immanuel. And it is probably among the Christmas hymns my favorite, because it is just this song of yearning. And to me, it paints the picture of where we are as followers of Christ right now. I long for the day that Jesus comes and makes it better. I long for the day that he returns and everything is made right. And this is a song of that kind of yearning. O come, Immanuel. O come, thou desire. O come, the one who will rescue us. O come and make things better. And then it rejoices in the hope that he will. That one day he will. And so we're going to sing this as our Christmas closing today, as we cling to those two promises. One, God, we're ready for the day. Whenever you're ready, we are ready for you to come and make everything right. And until then, we will rejoice in your presence and rejoice in the hope that one day you're coming back.